Podcast City Network.
Welcome to the Everett Show podcast. I am here at City Limits Tap Room in DeLand, Florida at the Podcast City Network 1 year anniversary.
1 year!
That's right, man. That is right. I am joined by my co-host, as always, my partner in crime, Mr. Chris Carnage of the Chris Carnage Show.
Hey, fans. It's a great time we're having down here at City Limits Tap Room in beautiful DeLand, Florida, and we are here for the Podcast City Network 1 year anniversary show.
1 year? That's right. And we're not alone tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, joining me again, he was on episode, I think it was 105, 103 of the Everett Lee Show. He is back for the 1 year anniversary. I want to welcome, right here standing on my left, your right, or which way you want to look at it, the true master of wrestling ring music, Hurricane JJ Maguire. Woo! That's right. JJ, thank you for showing up here at the Podcast City Network.
Yes.
1 year anniversary of
1
Podcast
year.
City Network. That's right. Those that didn't see the episode, I talked a lot about where you came from and what you did in the world of wrestling. WWF, the 80s into the 90s with WCW and WWF, which is WWE now. Tell us, where did it all start for Mr. JJ Maguire?
Well, I have to tell the truth, first of all, for once in my life. Jimmy Hart and I were in a multi-million seller worldwide hit group called the Gentrys. And the Gentrys had a multi-million seller in 66 with Keep On Dancing. But I joined in 72 and we did Cinnamon Girl by Neil Young, but we had it in a 45 record. A lot of kids don't even know what that is, but that's how far back it goes. But Neil had it on the album, but we did a single of it, and it was a worldwide top 40 hit for us, and we were really thrilled about that. But that's how I met Jimmy Hart in the Gentrys, and we got started right there, and here we are today. It's still playing. We've done over 114 WWF, WWE, WCW wrestling themes, and we're just thankful to all the great fans out there and for modern technology with the podcast situation, and you guys are at the pinnacle of that, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, man. I really do appreciate it.
Woo! Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Yes.
I tell you what, it's really great having this show because we're here for something amazing, though. The 1 year anniversary show of the Podcast City Network, and we're so happy that you're here to join us. You even stepped away from a event that you're having up in Kentucky right now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, Chris. I'm an owner of KZW, that's Kentucky Zone Wrestling in Kentucky, and we had our biggest event tonight. It's called Dedication. A good friend of ours named Jeffrey Carter, who was a young wrestler that died unexpectedly. We're raising money for his footstone and headstone for his gravesite. And we brought in people from Ohio Valley Wrestling, stars from Tennessee, all over Kentucky. It's the biggest roster of independent wrestlers ever assembled under one roof for one event.
Man.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent. It is. That is great. That is great. You came down here to be here at the 1 year anniversary of Podcast City Network and be back on the Everett Lee Show for this milestone event.
Most
I love
definitely.
it.
It's my pleasure, really.
Yes.
And this is helping our company as well. I made an announcement they're going to play when people look at the curtain for me to come out. I won't be coming out, but I have an announcement, and I explained to them why I was down here and everything. But this is going to really help Kentucky Zone Wrestling. It's going to help me, and I want to thank you guys for doing it. So, you know, this is a team effort, and it's my honor and privilege to be here to do this. And, again, this will help us as well. So it's a good thing for everybody.
It is. Definitely. Like you mentioned that you and yourself and Mr. Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart, was in the Gentrys.
That's right, baby.
Now, being in the Gentrys and touring the country, how did it come about with yourself and Jimmy Hart getting into WWF and getting to wrestling? Where did that start for you?
Well, I got a call one day, and Jimmy called, and he said he was in Mid-South Wrestling. He was just a fan that sat in the audience, and he went to see Jerry Lawler in Mid-South Wrestling, classic wrestling from Tennessee. And so Jerry said, Jimmy, I'm tired of seeing you sitting in the audience and watching. How about selling my merchandise for me out in the lobby? So Jimmy wasn't a ring manager or anything yet. He was so green, he didn't know anything about wrestling other than just watching it like most people.
Right.
So he was selling the merchandise out there, and then Lawler told him, says, Jimmy, I'll show you how to help me and be a ring manager. And Jimmy said, King, how do you do that? And Jimmy said, the King said, Jerry Lawler said, Jimmy, I'll show you how. The rest is history, as you all know. But then I got a call one day from Jimmy and Jerry, and Jerry wanted to have a 45 record to sell around the ring. Now, this was before WWF was going. This is before anything like that was selling music associated with the wrestling. So I said, well, sure. So it was the disco era. This is how far back in the 70s, late 70s. So I came up with Breaking Up is Hard to Do by Neil Sedaka. It was a big, huge record way back probably in the early year 60s. And so I made it disco. And then Lawler actually sang it. Jimmy helped him. Jimmy, did a key track where he could hear that and kind of sing along. Then we pulled Jimmy off. But Lawler did a really great job for a wrestler that doesn't really sing. Right. And that thing sold unbelievable. And then the Boogie Woogie Man, handsome Jimmy Valiant, wanted us to do a song for him as well. So then it just kind of went from there. But again, this is Mid-South Wrestling. Mm-hmm. So from there, we wound up, Jimmy got a call one day. It was Vince McMahon, and the WWF was just starting. And so Jimmy got the call, and he said, this is Vincent K. McMahon. Yeah, sure, guys, this is a rib. So he hung up on him, hung up on Vince. And then Vince called back and said, Jimmy, it's really me. Hillbilly Jim called Jimmy in between that and said, Jimmy, Vince is trying to reach you. It's real. But actually, Hillbilly Jim, our great friend, Hillbilly Jim, is the person he was already working some with Vince and those guys. And so he told Vince that he needed to look at the tapes of Jimmy Hart in the Mid-South. And so Vince saw that, but Jimmy hung up on him. But then when he called back and Hillbilly told him it's real, he said, you've got a plane waiting for you on Tuesday. Please come up, and we'd like to talk about having you join WWF. So that's kind of where it all started.
Nice. That definitely
very
is.
Nice. Now, with that, you ended up making the move up there, obviously, and of course, you became part of the WWF. So with that, what came with the inspiration with the next steps of what you ended up doing for the company?
Well, the first album that was out was mostly cover songs like Land of a Thousand Dances, and I always loved the cover of that album, by the way, of all the talent back there. And Jimmy had his finger in his ear and, the whole thing, right. The Chic and everybody, all the great classics. But we didn't have anything on the first album, but they realized they didn't want to just do cover music, so they wanted original stuff. So Jimmy called, said, Maguire, we've got a chance if you want to. Come to Cleveland and we can put some songs on the second wrestling album. I said, okay. So I took a little 4-track cassette recorder. It would fit about in your pocket. And got up there and we wrote the Honky Tonk Man theme. I got a long hide burns and my hair slicked back. Wrote that, and we wrote, Here Come the Axe! Here Come the Smasher! We wrote Walking Disaster. You know who that is, Demolition.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also, then Jimmy did a song himself called Crank It Up. And that was where it all began. And then from that time on, we've had music on every product, album, video game, whatever, that they put out through the WWF years through part of the WWE years as well.
Right.
Very nice.
Right. That definitely is. And through the years of being with Jimmy Hart, Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart, and doing music for WWF, eventually you made that transition over to WCW when Hogan went back into wrestling. But before he went back into wrestling, he was on a TV show that you were a part of too, and you did the show's music for, which was Thunder in Paradise.
That's right.
How did that come about?
Well, Hulkster, Hulk used to come down to the room. We always had a room at the Coliseums during the shows, and Hulk would come down on just by himself and come to the room. I knew Hulk in the hall or whatever out back and so on, but never said much to him, But Hulk would come down the room when Jimmy was out with, say, a couple of the guys or whatever going to the ring, and he wanted to listen to some of the music, and so he met me in that way. And then by the time all this went around and we started doing the 114 themes that we did over time, Hulk, when he did Thunder in Paradise, he wanted me to be a character on the show, and he wanted Jimmy and myself to also write music for the show.
Right.
So that's kind of how that all went together. And plus, Hulk called me and Jimmy together on a conference call and said, Maguire, we need you to drive the Viper. Well, this is when he went with WCW.
Yes.
He was in the parade. Mm-hmm. And they called me and said, Hulk says, Maguire, Jimmy Hart can't drive a stick shift. I need you. I know you're a car guy.
Oh, man.
So that's how that worked. And I drove the Viper in the comeback parade, and Hulk was sitting on the back, and Jimmy was running around with a megaphone. And I'm on the trading card, the WCW trading card. Jimmy's not in it. Somehow he jumped out of the frame, and the trading card has Hulk and myself on the trading card.
That's awesome. That's
is
awesome. Now, when you transitioned to WCW, how different was that going from the WWF to a totally different wrestling promotion?
It was different. But Hulk, of course, had carte blanche because of who he is and what he knows and how intelligent and how brilliant and great that the Hulkster is, and Jimmy, too, as well. And it was a different experience, but like I say, Ted Turner gave us leeway, to do what we kind of thought, and it was a great experience. And like I say, it was different. It was a little lower key business-wise, maybe, but maybe in a certain way, it was as high or higher key than WWF had been.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I know you and yourself and Jimmy Hart was in WCW for quite a while.
Yes.
And then when you left WCW and went on to pursue other things, what did you go and pursue after you left WCW?
Well, I went on. I ran a recording studio up in Kentucky for a while, and then I worked on a lot of my own original music as well.
Right.
And did appearances and so forth. But I got married a little bit after that time and started having kids, and you know how that is. You have to put that at a top priority.
Right.
But there's a little bit of a lull in the need for me and us. And so I raised a family, and I have two great kids, Marshall and Ava Maguire, and they're just great people. They're teenagers now, but I had all this other had been so far back, and I thought, well, that was fun while it lasted, and it was a great thing, but whatever. And I just kind of forgotten about everything and put it on the side. But one day my son came home from school, and he was like 14 years old. He said, Dad, I said, what's wrong, son? He said, Dad, the kids at school keep asking me, is your daddy that wrestling music man? And he said, they don't believe me, Dad. Will you text? He had a list of about 20-something kids that he wanted me to text to tell them, yeah, it's really true. So I thought, wow, if kids that young are interested in that, then there's something more to it than I guess I realized, and maybe I should get back involved and get back into it and let the fans and the people have their memories and ask questions and have fun. And so really it was my kids that brought me back out of the basement, so to speak.
Right. Definitely. And a big thing, too, like you said, being able to get back in, having been part of so many iconic moments and things that have been involved in the wrestling industry. How does it feel to be in that type of lore of the great golden years of professional wrestling?
Yes.
Well, we didn't really, at the time, like I was talking to Honky Tonk Man last week, and Honky says, Jimmy Maguire, he says, we didn't think it would last that long, so we really put in everything and more over the top to really do it all, because we didn't figure it would last that long.
Right.
And I sure had no idea that this interest would be to this day. And I figured it'd just be something I'd do for a summer, and I could say, yeah, I did a couple of 3 songs for WWF, and thank you very much, and then I'd be working at Walmart. but somehow, by the grace of God and the miracle of wrestling, it's still going, and people are interested, and I'm really thankful for it. I'd be nothing. All of us would be nothing if it weren't for the interest of the fans and the hearts of people like you guys to help keep the dream alive.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when it comes to the theme songs and the collaboration you and Jimmy Hart collaborated with on the songs and stuff, what would you say would be one of your favorites? I know you probably have a lot of favorites though, but what was the funnest song to come up with in theme song when you and Jimmy were together and creating such magic when you guys were working in WWF?
Well, Chris in Denver, first of all, let me take my glasses off so I can see what you're saying. Thank you for that question. They're all favorites, actually. I love them all, but I guess some of the personal two faves I'm going to put at the top maybe is, of course, Hulk's American Made theme that we wrote for WCW. They wanted something that was in a vein of Real American, but not just like it. So I had to come up with something, and Jimmy and I, that was similar but different.
Right.
And I think we did okay with that. But beyond that, the most played theme of all time in the wrestling business is Sexy Boy and Shawn Michaels. And I want to thank Shawn for a few years after, a decade after, 8 years or so, or 10 years after he was doing that and had the theme. Vince and the guys came to him and said, we're thinking about kind of changing your character and the way you look or whatever, and to maybe get a newer type, even different audience. And Shawn was so kind. Shawn said, Vince, let me tell you guys something. He told he and Pat Patterson that he said, no. He said, the people know me by that theme music, and I would be a fool to ever change that music. And there's no way I'm ever going to change that music. So Jimmy and I were just so thankful, and it's the most played theme in wrestling history. He's so cool. He's so sexy.
That is awesome.
Most definitely. Now I have to ask though, with all the different types of talent you worked with across all these different promotions, who's one of your favorites to be able to work with?
Oh wow! I mean, all of them really, but I'd have to say the Hulkster, because the Hulk is. People got a wrong perception about Hulk and all this gobbledygook about what he said about other people and so forth. And, there isn't a one of us that hadn't been so mad about something that we said words that we regret and would never want to say in public. And it's just a shame that the people they think in their mind that Hulk is a certain kind of person because he used a bad word or two. But I'm going to tell you, I've traveled the world with Hulk Hogan. I've driven his Viper and been to his home and stayed and been with Hulk and sat in bathroom stalls next to each other, of course with a wall between us, and talked about muscle cars and different things. The public should know that the real Hulk Hogan is a person that's concerned about other people's welfare. He's a sensitive person. He's a really wonderful, kind person. And in my travels around the world with Hulkster, he never had any comments about race or religion or creeds. He never, ever, and as God is my witness, that is the truth. But Hulk is always kind to me and Jimmy Hart. And I have nothing but total respect for Hulk Hogan, regardless of anything he ever said.
Awesome. Now, working with Hulk Hogan, you, Jimmy Hart, and Hogan formed the Wrestling Boot Band.
Yes.
The Wrestling Boot Band. You mentioned when we were talking, having a conversation, that you went over to England. And you were on the BBC.
Ah, yeah.
And what was it that Hulk Hogan called you right there on one of the shows over there when you were promoting the Wrestling Boot Band?
Well, Hulk says, first, he was just the only person on. And then he said, wait a minute, he told the interviewer, he said, you got extra chairs up here. Jimmy Hart and my guitar player, J.J. Maguire, get up here. We weren't prepared. We went, oh, yeah, okay. So we came stumbling and jumped up there. And Hulk, they asked about Jimmy, and then he said he's my manager, ring manager, and kind of my business manager too. And Maguire is our musical arranger and writer, and guitar player and keyboard player and bass player and drummer. I play everything. And I like to remind the people that all those classic themes that you hear, that's me playing all the instruments, except we had a few guests on a few different things. But back to what you were saying. So Hulk said, yeah, that's J.J. Maguire, my guitar player and music arranger. He is the toilet seat destroyer, he says. And he says, Maguire has already gone through about 17 toilet seats from the plane to on the ground. Everywhere we go, he breaks them up. So that's what he is. He's the toilet seat destroyer.
Oh, no, that's classic.
That is definitely classic, man.
Now, one thing I definitely want to ask about you, just to kind of take a step back, and your time with the Gentrys, what was it like working with Jimmy Hart through all of this? He's such a great human,
Jimmy Hart he and Hulk Hogan are the smartest people that's ever been in wrestling, period. Now, I know there's people who want to argue that and so on. Vince is the smart, but the feet on the ground and boots on the ground running, smartest people in wrestling is Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart, period. And Jimmy Hart is one of the most influential people in my life. He's a person that if you're dull and dumb, you spend a few minutes around Jimmy Hart and you'll be smart and conquering. Jimmy Hart, it would give me great inspiration, to write these themes and whatever and so forth. But Jimmy is just one of the greatest of all time wrestling, and as a person too. He's been always kind to me. I mean, I've lived with Jimmy and his family at different times, and we've been around the world together. And I got off the plane when I came down for this event, and the cab driver says, "Are you Jimmy Hart?" And I said I'd like to be, but I said no. But we favor each other because we were from the South, and we've been together a lot of years in the Gentrys, and we're like brothers of another mother for real. So I want to thank Jimmy especially for being my best friend in the whole world and including me on all sorts of things. And I had to tell you real quick the story about how I got in the Gentrys. The Gentrys, an agent that booked a group that I was with from Lexington, Kentucky, our group broke up when we came back to Lexington. We came down to Florida and played a series of events. But anyway, I'll make it quick as I can. So the agent called me, Joe Powers, and said, "Maguire," he said, "there's a guy named Jimmy Hart." Well, I didn't know Jimmy Hart from Jimmy Nothing, Jimmy Dirt. And he said, "Maguire," he said, "this guy named Jimmy Hart in Memphis, he owns the name of the Gentrys, the hit group." I went, "Oh, gosh, the Gentrys? Yeah, tell me more." He said, "They're looking for a drummer." He said, "Call him right now." I told him you're going to call, that you're the man, that you're dependable, you're on time, you're self-contained, and so forth. So anyway, I called this Joe Powers agent guy, and he told me, "Call Jimmy right then." I called Jimmy, talked to Jimmy. Jimmy said, "Well, Mr. Maguire, you're up against Jerry Lee Lewis's drummer, Great Balls of Fire, the classic song." He said, "You're up against one of Ray Charles's drummers."
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Man.
So I said, "Well, I'm not nervous because I'm a rock, modern type drummer at the time."
Right.
And I said, "I tell you what, I'd like to audition. If you don't want me, there's no hard feelings. Thanks a lot. I'll pay for everything. Forget about it, and I will say hello to you sometime down the road. But if you take me, then you'll pay half my expenses for coming down at the hotel and the gas, and we'll do it that way." And he said, "Well, okay, but you know what you're up against." I said, "Yes, sir." So I went down. I stayed at the hotel that following Tuesday or whatever it was. Got a knock on the door. It's Jimmy Hart. He looked like one of the Bay City Rollers. he had his pants were jacked up like that, plaid pants and everything about to his knees, and he looked like one of the Rollers,
Right.
Bay City Rollers.
Right.
And so, but he was so nice. He came in and sat down on the other bed and looked right at me in my eyes directly, and we talked and got to know each other a little bit. And he said, "Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow down at the studio." The audition was at the old American recording studios in Memphis, is where Elvis cut a lot of his big records.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
So
Nice.
I go in. The other two guys are there. One guy goes in a few minutes. He comes out. The next guy goes in. He comes back out, and they're waiting. They're going to listen to all three of us before they decide. I'm the last guy on the totem pole. So I go in. I had a big double bass drum set. They were blown away by that drum set, but I thought I'd scared them. We played through "Going Down," a song, "Going Down, 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 Down" by Don Nix. He's from Memphis too, hit songwriter and performer. So I knew the song, of course. Played through it and doing the ba 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 ba, double bass drum stuff. And so then they stopped right in the middle of the song, And I thought, oh my goodness. I said, I scared them. That's freaked them. I did too much. And then they didn't say much. And then they kind of whispered to each other. And then they didn't say anything else. And then Wes Stafford, who was Jimmy's musical arranger at that time in the Gentrys, he went through the door and came back in. And so I was already taking my cymbals down. I figured, well, I blew this one good, scared them with too much stuff. And I'll be dad darned if Jimmy and Wes turned around, they whispered something to each other, and I was taking my cymbals off, my cymbal, and I put it down, and they said, Maguire, and I went, yes, and they both reached over and went, welcome to the Gentrys, brother.
Yeah.
Yes. Very nice.
It's true, all of it.
That is. Yeah. I think we have some time for opening up for some Q&A.
That I think we do.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. We got some people here waiting to ask a question.
All right.
Yes, Eddie.
Now, Mr. J.J. Maguire,
Yes, Eddie.
I think I asked you this before, but just for the sake of the audience who's listening to you,
Your favorite
Gosh,
piece
that's
of
it.
music
That-
you composed,
and if possible, the most complicated one.
and the most
Like
complicated
like
one.
the one that you took the most time trying to compose.
Well, that probably would be the $1 Million Man theme. I came up with a
Nice.
couple of things, and Jimmy listened to it, and then he kind of whistled a melody or whatever, but we weren't hitting it on that. It was rough, and I kept thinking about Ted's image and everything and so forth, and $1 Million Man. I said, well, one thing's for sure, Jimmy, it's all about the money. That's it, Maguire. And so he immediately started jotting down some words, and then all of a sudden I just kind of fell on the keyboard and came up with the theme, and then everybody's got to pay, and the rest of it just came out like that. So that was probably, to answer your question, that's maybe one of the more difficult things. So we took more than 5 minutes to write.
Nice. Nice.
What's
Awesome.
your favorite? Like
My favorite,
the one you, if you could say, listen to this one.
well,
Listen to this.
let me answer that in a kind of a funny way. The first theme that I did for WWF was Jimmy Superfly Snuka.
Oh.
Yes. Nice.
And that's my voice going super fly, but it's sampled on a keyboard, and then I played it like 2 octaves lower, so it's down low like that. But I'll tell you something. No rap artist or anybody had done the drop sample voice yet. I think that I may possibly be the first person to do that.
Oh man.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. But to answer your question further, I have my 2 favorite themes. I had to put them together at the top, and that's Hulk's American Made and also Sexy Boy. But I love Demolition too.
Oh yeah.
So I start going, and I like them, quite a few of them. But to answer your question, the top 2 together in the number 1 position for me would be American Made for WCW for Hulk, and then Sexy Boy.
Nice.
Very
I have
nice.
a question.
Yes.
All right, we have another over
I
here.
know
Yes.
that you have children.
Yes, ma'am.
We've discussed this before.
That's
Would
correct.
you want them to go into wrestling? Would you push them into wrestling knowing what you know, even though you were a wrestler?
Well, I am a wrestler. I'm a licensed wrestler in the state of Kentucky. I can wrestle. I know how to wrestle some. I'm not doing flip-flops over the top rope down into the crowd. But to answer your question, I've allowed them to be who they are and what they want to be with their talents they're born with, like me. And lucky for me, my parents always wanted me to get a haircut and get a regular job, which I've worked with some regular jobs. It's like I never did any of that. But no, I wouldn't push my kids ever on anything, ever. I try to see what their talents are and what they are good at, and I let them forge their own path. And so far, they've done a real good job of that, and I'm not going to say a word to them. They've taken it upon themselves. I know a lot of kids aren't that way, but somehow I got lucky. But I was married to a woman 17 years younger than me, so that might have had something to do with it.
Yes.
If they said, Dad, I want to be a wrestler, would you tell them don't do it? Or would
No,
you let them
no, I would never tell them no. I would just tell them, well, you're getting ready to get into something that has a lot of heartbreaks and a lot of ups and downs. So like music, the music business is unbelievable ups and downs. But no, if they came to me and said, I want to be a wrestler, but I don't think there's any chance of that because they're teenagers now, young teenagers, and their interests are in, luckily, maybe in a way, I won't have to tell them no.
What about comes to favorite gimmick.
Favorite gimmick.
Well, my favorite gimmick is Jimmy Hart.
Mouth of the South.
Nice.
That's right, the mouth of the South. Jimmy's my favorite gimmick. Yes.
Oh man, I tell you what, that's some great stuff. But you know what? We do have a great event going on right now.
We do.
What is that event? Oh yeah, the Podcast City Network 1 year anniversary.
Anniversary, baby. It's right here, right now.
That's right. We got so
That's
much
right.
great stuff playing, don't we, Denver?
We do.
Everett, whichever
Everett.
one you are today. I broke kayfabe.
I got a question for you.
I'll take your question.
Who do you think is the big dick energy? Who has big dick?
Who has big dick energy? Well,
Hulk Hogan.
Hulk Hogan has big dick energy, brother.
Right, brother.
Brother.
All right. That brings me to something here. All right.
What'd that bring you to?
All right. Do your best, brother. I'll do mine. And JJ, ready? Let me tell you something, brother. Go for it.
I need to jump.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When I come down here with the 24-inch pythons, coming down flexing on you with Mean Gene over here, giving me the props that I deserve, brother, you can't handle Hulkamania.
Nice.
Beautiful.
Nice. Let me tell you something, Mean Gene. Hulkamania runs wild, brother.
I almost hit my beer everywhere.
Let me tell you something, brother. There's only one way to go, and that's over the top. And Mean Gene knows what I'm talking about. Tell him, Mean Gene.
Yes.
Go for it.
I'll go over there.
I think we're gonna pull him in.
Come on over.
Why not?
There you go.
Hey, folks, Big Money Eddie from the second rounds.
Yes.
Get him, Eddie.
Now let me tell you something, me, Gene. JJ Maguire has the best CDs going out there. Now, what you gonna do when JJ Maguire goes Hulkamania on you?
Oh, nice. Nice.
That's pretty. I like that. You're hired.
Thank you, Eddie, from
Thank you,
Second
Eddie.
Rounds Florida.
Yes, thank you, Eddie.
Energetic
you.
Eddie right there, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, Big Money Eddie.
Big money.
Big money.
Buddy, that is awesome.
Hey, don't forget to tell them about my book coming out.
Yes, tell us. That's in the works right now. You're having a book. You're going to be releasing here when it's finished. You're working on it. What can you tell us about the book?
Okay, Denver and Chris, the book is titled, My Life in Heaven Town. No, it's not necessarily a religious book, but in a way it's a spiritual book about wrestling and my adventures working in Hollywood with icons like Bob Hope, Marlon Brando, Farrah Fawcett, so forth. But I don't want to reveal too much, and then nobody will buy the book. But the book's coming out later this summer, and it's going to be interesting. It's not so much about big old guy me. I'm a tall guy, but I'm not the big old guy like Hulk Hogan. But it's a story more about the experiences of my observations of some of the greatest actors and performers of all time, and how they really are in real life. I think that all ages of the public will be interested in not only knowing about the older icons. Well, a lot of young kids don't even know who Bob Hope is and so forth, but they will after they read the book. They'll wonder. But
Yes.
I talk about a whole variety of ages of icons, all the way from Hollywood to wrestling and beyond.
Yes.
Very
Yes,
nice.
You definitely do. And it's been a pleasure having you
Definitely.
Oh, the
show up
pleasure's
here
mine.
for the 1 year anniversary of Podcast City Network. And right before we close, I got one more question to ask you. What can people expect from KCW, Kentucky's Own Wrestling?
Kentucky's Own Wrestling is getting ready to have a worldwide streaming show on Twitch and Roku. And we're anticipating being the world's #1 independent wrestling faction. And that's a big statement and a lot of noise, but we're going to put together a show that is unique and unlike the top 4 or whatever. It's mainly match after match and then a grudge and then a spot and blah, blah. It's going to be different. We're going to have segments about inside segment like I just shot a promo, Denver and I did, and he's in part of it at the Hulk Hogan Beach Shop Museum in Orlando.
Yes.
And that's going to be one of the close-up segments. But we're just going to there'll only be probably 3 matches per show, but it's all wrestling related. And John Cosper is going to do a segment on the history of wrestling and talk about Strangler Ed Lewis, and I've got a big story to tell on that too.
Nice. Nice. Anything else you want to add, Chris?
All that, it's been an amazing pleasure to have you here at our Podcast City Network 1 year anniversary show. We love the fact that you came down here to take the time to be with us on this day. That's very monumentous for us, and we truly thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. Really, thank you so much. This is going to do something for all sorts of people, not only entertainment for the viewers and listeners, but for us as well, to share our lives and information and our spirituality through wrestling and entertainment to share with all the public.
That's right.
Definitely.
That's right. Thank you so much, Mr. Maguire. Hurricane JJ Maguire.
Yes.
Thank you all very much.
True
Thank you.
Master of wrestling and ring music. And be sure to check out Podcast City Network on the follow social medias. Over on Facebook, Podcast City Network. You can hit them up on Twitter at Podcast City Net. You can hit the Everett Lee Show up on Facebook, The Everett Lee Show. And on Twitter at the it's cold out here.
It is cold.
Did it catch you there?
We're in Florida and it's cold.
Yes, it is. At the Everett Lore Score Lee. That's right there for the Everett Lee Show. And you can listen to Everett Lee Show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Libsyn, and you can check them out on YouTube and Podcast City Network's YouTube channel as well, and Twitch, Podcast City Network. And that's pretty much, I am the closer of the network.
That you are.
Of the shows. We're getting ready to enjoy the Craig Thompson Project.
But don't forget, we do have one more thing after this.
What's that?
Yes, we do.
We have good old Draft Day brought to you by
Yes.
Podcast City Network live here at City Limits Tap Room. And it's going to be amazing. We're going to have a nice taste test of 4 beers and make our pick of the month. So make sure you don't miss it.
All right.
That's right. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to check out Draft Day.
Good stuff.